This is the Merriam-Webster's third new international unabridged dictionary, and this is the official dictionary of the Scripps National Spelling Bee. It contains over 375,000 words, which are all legal tender for any spelling bee that you will be participating in. But as spellers, what we do is we try to understand as many of these words as we can. It's not all about trying to sit down, hunker down, and memorize all of the words in this dictionary, because it's also quite heavy to hold. And it's more about understanding how these words came about through the languages that they had to come through to be in the English language. Because as we all know, English is composed of many different languages, not just one language that evolved out of nowhere. So we'll be covering a few different topics, like phonetic symbols for beginners, success strategies for the spelling bee itself, how these words went through different languages, their etymologies, the roots of words, so how different words have parts that fit together, kind of like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, and then some study tools that can help you study for the spelling bee itself. So, in 2013, in 7th grade, I won my school bee, the district spelling bee, and then I was finally the co-champion of the Houston spelling bee for the first time. That was in 2013. The National Spelling Bee takes place in multiple stages of oral and written rounds. But before that, you have to get from your class and your school spelling bee to your district spelling bee, to the Houston Public Media Spelling Bee, and then finally the National Spelling Bee, where there are 280, more than 280 now, spellers from across the entire country who were there and all competing and having fun. So there, I was a national finalist in 2013, I placed 7th, and then in 2014, I repeated all my previous wins again to go into the Scripps National Spelling Bee, where I tied for the highest score in the preliminaries written round, where everyone takes the same written test, and I placed 2nd in the semifinals written test, so I had the 2nd highest score in the semifinals written round, and I was the only speller to have a perfect score, no mistakes in vocabulary in either of the written tests. And so, unfortunately, in the semifinals, due to a momentary lapse in judgment, I mistook one single letter in a word and was thus eliminated, which unfortunately left me as a semifinalist. But even though I had a very high cumulative score, it was an amazing spelling bee journey that I undertook, and all the experiences that I went through and all the knowledge that I gathered are still with me today. Which is why I'd like to share some of that with all the young spellers today. How many of you guys have done a spelling bee before? Yeah? Who wants to do a spelling bee again? All of you? Have you started studying? No? You know what the Spell It booklet is? Do you? Yeah? So in your classroom or school spelling bee, you get a booklet called the before Misspelled, the American Dictionary.
Yeah,
right.
The school study list.
The school study list that has to do with the right. So you guys have seen that list, right? Okay, good. So the spelling bee is an exciting journey where you learn new words and then you expand your vocabulary too. You guys know that there's the new vocabulary section in the National Spelling Bee? No? In the written, before you didn't have to know what any of the words meant. You could ask for the meaning while you were spelling on stage and they would give it to you. But now, in the written rounds, how in the preliminaries and semifinals you have written rounds, they have a vocabulary part where you have to give the meaning of vocabulary words that they ask you. So from those, you not only learn about different words, but that also gives you more knowledge about other areas. Because I'll be reading words that have to do with medical equipment, that have to do with kinds of art, that have to do with plant cells and different topics in science. So it's not just one specific thing that I'm learning. It's completely interdisciplinary. So, preparing for a spelling bee builds your confidence. It teaches you to think on your feet. And under high-pressure situations, you know how to think and act. So in this journey, you guys know that you should study for a spelling bee, right? But once you study, you have to set a goal. Do you know what a goal is? Yeah? So have you ever said to yourself, I want to win this spelling bee? Yeah? Whether it's your classroom spelling bee or your school spelling bee. And then whether you met that goal or not, it gives you motivation to do this all over again. Because all of you said that you wanted to do another spelling bee. So you have some motivation, which is great. Now it's just time to plan and act to reach that goal. So the spelling bee teaches you life lessons of perseverance and resilience. So as long as you have learnt something from your mistakes, then you haven't made a failure. So it's a learning experience that really enriches you throughout the entire process. So here's some basic tips about the spelling bee. Oops, no, go back. When you see a tough word that you've never seen before, you shouldn't get discouraged. How many of you have seen a word that you didn't know? All of you? Yeah? That's because none of us know all of the words in the English language when we start learning the language. So we're all going to see a word that we don't know. But then we have to learn it. And so it takes a lot of cumulative work. You'll have to study some and then study some more. And each bee you go on, you'll keep amassing knowledge. And then so you can learn from other spellers too. From other champion spellers and their techniques, you see, for example, that some spellers like writing on their hands while they're up to spell. So if I come up to the podium and I get the word cat, I might say, can I have the definition? And they'll tell me something like a feline animal, which isn't really the definition of cat. But before I spell, I'll make sure that I'm concentrated and focused on the word and write on my hand C-A-T before I say it out loud. And then I'll say out loud, cat, C-A-T, cat. And so little things like this, how to be focused in a spelling bee, can really help you a lot while you're up there spelling. And that's where the different questions you can ask in the bee come into play. You should ask as many questions as possible to help you understand more about the word. Do you guys know any of the questions that you can ask? Yeah? Right, the language of origin, where the word comes from. Yes? Alternative spelling? Not exactly, pronunciation. So whether a word can be said any different way than the way they say it in the beginning, right? Yes? Definition, right. What the word means. The part of speech, whether it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, or other parts of speech. Yes? Use the word in a sentence. Because not only do you get a clue as to what the word sounds, you get a clue as to what the word means, and that can all help you remember what the spelling of the word is. You can ask them to repeat the word. So you can ask the pronouncer to repeat the word as many times as you want before before you don't have enough time anymore, which is at the nationals. You don't really have to worry about that in your local spelling bees. But all of these questions are important to ask while you're spelling. So once you have this information, you can combine it and use it to help you spell the word. So does anyone know how the language of origin could possibly, in any scenario, help you spell a word? Mm-hmm.
Because different languages have different ways to spell their word.
Right. Could you possibly think of any examples of such a phenomenon? Go ahead.
Like ballet for France,
Mm-hmm.
they have the T at the end instead
Mm-hmm.
of just making it like
Yeah.
seven.
Great. So, right, and this board, all the brown stuff that you can see on it, which was just erased a few minutes ago, is practice from my vocabulary practice. So all the words that I got wrong and that were written on here to keep looking at and learn again. But that was a great observation. Thank you very much. B-A-L-L-E-T, right? That's French. And so this is a silent T. Can everybody see this?
Maybe you can use the blue or the
Like,
black because
yeah,
it's too light.
that
I
would be-
think. Can you all see? Yes, it's kind of light.
Oh. Okay. And then, all the parents in this room, you're very proud of your spellers, aren't you? Yes? And so it's really important to support your spellers, whether they win a B or not, because it's been a learning experience. They put a lot of hard work into studying the words, learning more, and then in the end, whether you win or not, whether you get a trophy or a certificate or not, it's about getting any knowledge, if at all, out of this entire process, and then it will have been worthwhile. So this is kind of like a flowchart of how you should have a thought process while you're in the spelling bee. Does anyone know what a flowchart does like this? Yes? No? Anyone else? No? Have you guys ever done something like a bean sorting challenge at school, where you have different jelly beans and you're asked to find the flavor? No? Oh, it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun. But, so you have a word, right? Now, when you have a word, and let's say you have a jelly bean. There are different flavors of jelly bean. Each of them have different kinds of colors, different patterns. You can have a yellow jelly bean. You can have a yellow jelly bean with dots. And they're going to be different flavors. So just like that, you have different words from the dictionary. Some words will sound similar. Some words will have similar meanings. But all of these little clues and details will help you figure out what the word is. So you start out with the word. Now you can repeat the word and then ask the questions. So you have the definition, which is, what does this word mean? The etymology, what languages does this come from? And in the case of a word like ballet, which it comes from French, that'll help you remember that in French, if you have a sound at the end, it's probable that you'll have a spelling like ET, since the T becomes silent. The part of speech that can often help make a distinction between things like nouns and adjectives, and have it used in a sentence. That gives you some context, some more insight into the word, and in the National Spelling Bee, it often gives you a laugh and helps to relieve some of the tension. Then you process this in your brain. You try to remember the word. you guys have all been on stage and spelled a word. Have you ever had to stop for a second and think about and try to remember the word? Yes, I see a few nods. I see a few nods. But then you have to be confident with your judgment. Do you ever feel like you're second guessing yourself? You come up with the spelling and you think, wait, is that really right? Is this the right spelling? So it's important to have confidence in the spelling that you come up with and say, yes, I think this is the correct spelling, and so I will go with this. And then it's important to repeat the word before and after you spell, but you spell the word. And this is kind of the science, art, and kind of the algorithm of spelling while you're on stage. So here are some study tips. The study booklet called Spell It, if you've ever seen it.
But this is in your handout?
Right. This is in your handouts. You have a packet called the handout. And in that packet, right. You hold it up, that's a good idea.
Last page of the handout.
The handout, which looks like this. On the last page, you have a list of resources that can help you study for Bs, which are also on this slide. So the My Spell It study guide or booklet came out around 2008, 2009, and it's really useful, I found, because it splits the word into different languages of origin. So there's one section with words from Latin, another section with words from Japanese, and it gives you some tips on the side pages that say, like, Japanese is spelled largely phonetically. So a Japanese spelling is not going to be as complicated as, say, a French spelling. So these little tips that help with the languages and sort of to categorize. Have you guys ever sorted your clothes by color? Socks in pairs? Yeah? Everything in a jumble? So it's kind of hard to find matching socks if they're all in a jumble, right? So just like that, it's hard to learn words when they're in a jumble. So I found it easier if I categorized words by what they meant, what languages they came from, what kind of word they were. You can go to the dictionary and do an entire search. Also, the online dictionary is a very important resource. In case you didn't know, the Merriam-Webster's, their new international dictionary, this thing that's really quite heavy, this one, is available online as a paid subscription dictionary, which allows you to perform searches. So I can search for all the words that have pasta in their definition. Isn't that pretty cool? So I'll find all the words that have to do with pasta. And I can study those words, and I'll remember them because I'm studying pasta. Yeah, yes, I can. If I... I'll show the dictionary. Just a second. Yes. To make it bigger? No. Okay.
This is what the page looks like. Okay, the
Right.
online dictionary.
This is what the online dictionary page looks like. The Merriam-Webster Unabridged Dictionary.
So the same thing is what you can find online. Okay.
So here, you can do something like search type definition, and you enter pasta. And now I have all 35 words in the dictionary with the word pasta in the definition. You see how Alfredo sauce has the word pasta in the definition? So now, let's say I'll do a search for the words with ballet in the definition. And that's 117 words. So like this, you can categorize words into chunks and have a list of words. Just have a list of words with all the terms that have to do with ballet. And that really helps expedite the process of not only learning the words themselves, but also their definitions. So you should start with the Misspelled document. Once you've mastered those words, you can move on to the Paideia word list. Released around 2006. The Misspelled here, that sorts words based on their etymology, what language they're from. The Paideia kind of breaks up words into both their languages of origin as well as their definitions. So for example, and there are links on the page before the last in the handouts document. So the Paideia list has words, for example, it has a page devoted to words called Poe words. They're words used by Edgar Allan Poe in his writings. You guys know who Edgar Allan Poe is? Some of you? Yeah? He's a poet. He wrote poems like The Raven. Anyone who knows Edgar Poe might know the poem The Raven. And after that is the Consolidated Word List, which was released by Scripps around 2002-3-ish. And this word list, which contains how many words?
23,000.
23,000 words in the Consolidated Word List. If you choose to print it out like we originally did, it kind of makes a few binders that are like this. So there's an electronic format and paper. But these words are all words that have appeared in the Scripps National Spelling Bee before. So all of these words have been asked. And that makes them great, important words to know for a bee like the National Spelling Bee, or a bee like the Houston Public Media Spelling Bee, which is arguably one of the hardest in the country. And you guys know that the Houston Public Media Spelling Bee is the third largest regional bee in the country, right? Because not only is it the greater Houston area, it's the entire southeastern Texas region that feeds into the Houston Public Media Spelling Bee and then to the nationals. So it's a really hard, really fun bee that goes into nationals and prepares you, the bee itself prepares you for the National Spelling Bee. So apart from these word lists, which is just one part of it, you also have to study the words and remember them and understand them. So it's important to, after you study the words, have your mom, your dad, your siblings, your friends, your teachers quiz you on the words. So you can have a piece of paper with words and then look them up in the dictionary and then have someone quiz you the words. And if you can spell the words correctly, then that's great. And if you spell it incorrectly, then you can write down the word that you missed and have it on another sheet of paper, another list. And now those words you'll pay extra attention to and review. Have any of you guys ever had to study for a test? Yeah? All of you? It's good. You're going to school. That's a good thing. So when you're studying for a test, and let's say you have one piece of information that you want to remember, right? Do any of you have different methods that you use to help yourself remember that? How do you guys study? Yeah?
Do problems like the word we tested on
Right.
over and over.
So problems, practice exercises, repeat it over and over again. Yes?
Practice tests.
Practice tests, right? Mm-hmm.
Online dictionary.
Online dictionaries, okay. Great. So those are all good ways that you can help yourself study. And using those, you can create your own word lists, whether you like making them on the computer or with your hands and a pencil and a paper. And then you can solve crossword puzzles to help you with both your vocabulary and your spelling. And along with that comes the great spelling word being a cruciverbalist. So someone who is a cruciverbalist solves crossword puzzles. Did any of you know that? Great, you've learned a word. So the word
Sweetheart, why don't you come this side and write? Yeah, so everybody can see. Yeah, this is easy.
C-R-U-C-I-V-E-R-B-A-L-I-S-T. But the word cruciverbalist means someone who solves crossword puzzles. Sure. And so a word like this, we were talking about roots, right? Has anyone ever heard of word roots before? Yeah? Yes? Right. So, the word cruciverbalist you can break up into parts, right? Can anyone look, and you said verbal, right? So you have verbal, and then right after verbal you have ist. Do you know any other words that end in ist? Dentist, I heard dentist. Scientist. So IST means someone that does something, right? So the IST means this, someone who does something. The verb part here means word. Word. And cruci, does anyone have an idea of what cruci means? Yeah? Yes?
Cross.
That's correct. So cruci means cross. Does anyone know any words that also start with cruci? Yes? Crucify, crucifix. So you can have the word crucify, you can have the word crucifix, and all of them come from the same cruci root. Right. So crucify. Crucifix. Sorry?
Cruciferous vegetables.
There's the word cruciferous. You have cruciferous vegetables.
Broccoli.
I'm sorry?
Broccoli.
Right. Broccoli is an example of a cruciferous vegetable. And so identify your spelling bee style. What kind of studying you like to do can also help you with in the bee itself. So let's say you like to type out words when you're practicing them. So oftentimes, occasionally, and increasingly in the past few years, we see spellers in the National Spelling Bee who air type their words at the podium. So that's generally an indicator that they've been practicing on the computer. So if you find that you have typed these words, and let's say you've retained muscle memory from typing them on the computer, then you may find it easier to type at the podium, and that can help you remember the word and the correct spelling. And let's say you've written down these words as you've studied them. And like I had done with the vocabulary words, covered a board with brown markered vocabulary words. And so in that scenario, writing down the word in your hand with an imaginary pen may help you remember the word and the correct spelling. And then when it comes to the bee itself, set a higher goal each year and practice daily. Whether it's just going on the dictionary and looking at the word of the day, as it may be. Today's word of the day is rambunctious. It means marked by uncontrollable exuberance, unruly. The example sentence. When Kelly gets a bit too rambunctious, her parents sit her down for a timeout. How many of you have ever been in a timeout before? I know I have. So a word like rambunctious, now you're going to remember the word rambunctious, aren't you? Yes? Who's going to remember the word rambunctious? Yeah? Hopefully. All right. So something as simple as that. You learned the word rambunctious. You learned the word cruciverbalist. Possibly even crucify and crucifix. So something like this, if you do just one word, one good word every single day, that'll help you learn many words when it comes around time for a B again. Yes. Hi, Ms. Cardona.
That's your social studies teacher?
Yes. Right. And then you can make tricks to help you remember the words.
What is mnemonic?
A mnemonic is something that helps you remember something. Do any of you know what the order of operations is? Yeah? What order you do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and the parentheses in. So you know the mnemonic for that is PEMDAS, right? PEMDAS. Or you know the order of the planets. How many of you know what order the planets are in? Yeah? Have any of you heard a sentence that helps you remember what the planets are? Yeah? What have you heard? Mercury?
Venus.
Earth? Yes?
I'm very excited monkey just served us nachos.
Yeah? Okay.
You can say it aloud so everyone hears.
Right. Could you say that again so I can repeat it?
My very excited monkey just served us nachos.
My very excited monkey just served us nachos. And so that's a mnemonic that helps you remember the order of the planets. And just like that, this is Houston. We're pretty close to Louisiana. How many of you have ever had etouffee? Cajun stew? Yeah, I see a few nods. Yeah? So you spell the word etouffee with E-T-O-U-F-F-E-E. So you have an F-F-E-E, like coffee. But the word etouffee, E-T-O-U-F-F-E, means smothered muted tones in a stringed instrument. That's pretty confusing, isn't it? Yeah? So, how can I help myself remember this? How can you help yourself remember this for a spelling bee? Maybe you can come up with the mnemonic that when it comes to stew, you want more of it to fill yourself up. And so you'll have 2 F's and 2 E's. But when you have smothered tones, you're making a softer sound, you'll have less letters, and so you only have 1 E. Did that make sense to you guys? Yeah? So what's the mnemonic for etouffee the stew? More? Why do you want more?
To fill yourself.
To fill yourself up? Yes. And what about the musical term? Less. And why less? Softer. Right. So now, in addition to cruciverbalist, crucify, crucifix, rambunctious, we know the difference between étouffé and étouffé, since they sound the same. They're homonyms. And then there are words that aren't homonyms, but they're pretty confusing in themselves, like cavaletti and capelletti. Cavaletti is a series of timber jumps for horses, and capelletti are small cases of dough filled with meat or cheese. So can anyone come up with a mnemonic for these words? Anyone? Yep. No? Yes?
The P in Cavaletti is for pasta.
Right, that's great. And not only that, but you can also tell that from the sound, which helps you more. Because you have capelletti, which has to do with pasta, and you have two P's, because again, the word that has to do with food has more letters, because you want more pieces of pasta to fill you up. So something like that won't apply everywhere, but you can definitely use that to help you out when you're trying to contrast food with horse jumping, right? So what about the timber jumps for horses? Can anyone come up with a mnemonic for that? These mnemonics are going to help you remember the words too. So it's not just about the discussion right now, but you're learning the words too. So maybe when you're trying to make a jump, you want the jump to be over with quickly, since horses can't really fly. So a horse falls back to the ground after it jumps, and so you have less letters. You have LLTT, but no two V's. So something, even if it's silly or absurd like that, like for me, I found that the sillier I made them, the more I was likely to remember them. Since I think, ha, that's pretty silly. Why did I even come up with that? And then I'd remember that. I came up with the silly mnemonic. Okay. So there are more words, like Ria, and Ria. Everybody here knows the Rio Grande, right? And so you'd probably know that Rio in Spanish means river. Ria is like a smaller river. So RIA, which is like RIO, is a creek, like a river. RYA is a Scandinavian hand-woven rug. Rug has 3 letters. Ria has 3 letters. And you won't spell it with an I because that's the river. Ria, the bird, has 4 letters because bird has 4 letters. And you'll spell it RHEA. There are 3 Orioles. Oriole, Oriole, and Oriole. So this is the bird, for example, the northern oriole. And then the oriole is the bay window. You don't want it to come out of the window too far, so you want it to have less letters than the bird. And then the aureole is like an aura. You guys have heard the word aura before? A-U-R-A? It's like a halo or like a presence. So just like that, you have a radiant light or a brightness around something. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, yeah. Now you should set some goals for your spelling career. You can start with winning your classroom bee, winning your school bee, moving on to district, seeing how well you do in district, and then making it to the Houston PBS spelling bee, and then seeing how you do there, aiming for the championship and to make it to the National Spelling Bee. Perhaps even with the ultimate goal of winning the National Spelling Bee. And so, with this goal, you restart every cycle every year of the spelling bee. Since it's not likely you'll win the National Spelling Bee your first year in the bee, you have to keep working at it every single year. And get on a routine, know what you're studying, and then keep working at it. So the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary is a tool that you should use. And the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary uses this pronunciation system. Can anybody pronounce this? Right. So like the A can be pronounced these different ways. The A right here, the A. Okay? Here is came because you have the line over the A, and that makes the long A sound. Down here you have two dots. The dots over the A make it a short A sound. Ah. So you have cat, that's an A, came, the line over the A, calm, the two dots over the A. Or you can have the O with one dot over it, which is aw, calm. The eh sound is made by the E. So you have the word any, which comes from the E, the N, and then the E with the line over it, since that makes the long E sound. E. You have call. Consonants are as they would be. Was. Now this interesting symbol here, excuse me, is the schwa. That was a wonderful circle. But the schwa, which is basically an upside down E, makes the sound. Has anyone ever seen the schwa before? No? Possibly? A few of you. So this upside down E sound makes the sound in was. Or for example, a word like hut. Let's say H-U-T. And then, or you can have was or was for alternate pronunciations of the word W-A-S. And then you have a word like aeroplane. So you have E-R, schwa, era, P-L, A with the macron, so A, and then N. Aeroplane. Does that make sense?
Why are you doing this?
So the reason we're doing this is because once you come to the dictionary and say you have a word like aeroplane, right? And we look it up and we're thinking, how do I say this word? Do I say aeroplane? We say aeroplane. And that's when these pronunciation symbols come in. Because if I come and see this word, study it as aeroplane, and then go to a spelling bee where they ask me aeroplane, I won't exactly remember this word. And it's harder to understand with the word airplane, since most of us have heard the word airplane before. But when you get to a more complicated word, like, let's say, this. If we look at this word, it's not exactly straightforward to come up with a pronunciation for this. Which is why it's important to look at the pronunciation symbols and see, here it says, the I with the line on top of it, which makes the long I sound, I, right? The U with one dot is the short U, and then the schwa that makes the sound. Cynosure. So this word is pronounced cynosure, with some British pronunciation variants. But we may not have pronounced it cynosure if we looked at it at first glance, which is why it's important to learn the pronunciations of the words.
So the first page of the dictionary has these things.
The first page of the paper dictionary, over here, so all this text has example words as well as the pronunciation symbols. Can everybody see the first page of the dictionary?
Yes.
So that's where the pronunciation symbols are, as well as their guide. And there's also one in the online dictionary right, used to be right below the, here it is, pronunciation symbols. And then it gives you the different symbols, and then you can hear the pronunciation. So consonants are as they would be. R is in red, and then the schwa as a but, so and then we can read the diacritical markings. So, can anyone take an attempt at this word here? Yes? Azure. Okay. What about the word right below that? Someone else? You? Close. So instead of being nabab, if you read the pronunciation symbols, the A at the beginning has the long line over it. So here, you have the line over the A. Because of the line, it's pronounced nabob, because this A has 2 dots over it, and that's the ah sound. So it's nabob. And that's really going to help you at a spelling bee if they say nabob, and you're not sure what that word is, right? Do you guys understand? Yeah? What about this word right here? Someone else? You? Mantilla. Good. So you have the long E. So you have man, T, ya. This apostrophe looking mark indicates that there is a primary stress on the following syllable. Anyone willing to try this? Close. So if you look at the pronunciation symbols, it's actually an H there. So you have rehoniador. The long A sound, re, honia, door. So this word is going to be pronounced rehoniador. Okay. Some more words. What should we do?
Yeah, we finish this one and then we take a break, okay?
So, some more words. So French words, like we had covered with ballet, there's a probability that if you end with the A sound, it'll be ET, right? So how do you spell, how do you pronounce this word at the top? Yes?
Cachet.
Cachet, right. So a cachet is a seal used as a mark of official approval. The word below that?
Boudoir.
Boudoir, right. And it means a woman's dressing room. Which reminds me, there's another word, and it is, where's... this. Boudoir, right? B-O-U-D-O-I-R. And then you have the word peignoir, a woman's loose negligee or dressing gown. So P-E-I-G-N-O-I-R. You have boudoir, the dressing room, and peignoir, the dress that you wear in the dressing room. So links like this can help you remember both the words and their meanings, which is going to help you out in the bee. You have a word like this. Can anybody pronounce this? I hear some whispers. Yes, go ahead.
Dossier.
Dossier, right. And the word below that?
Melange.
Mélange. So the N, when it's small and at the top, makes the nasalized N sound that you hear in French, the en. So this is mélange. And then, anybody want to try the German words? The first German word? Yes?
Vorlage.
Say that again?
Vorlage.
Right. Vorlage. So you have Vorlage. So an interesting thing in German is that when you have the F sound, you often have the V as the spelling. Instead of it being spelled with an F, like F-O-R-L-A-G-A, it's actually spelled vorlage, which makes them tough words for a spelling bee. Except if we happen to know that in German the F sound is spelled with a V, then we'll most probably get the word correct. The word below that, the German cheese. Yes?
Backstein.
Backstein. Very close. The A actually has the two dots on top of it, right? So you have Bachstein. With, if you ask for alternate pronunciations, Dr. Bailey at the Nationals or your regional pronouncer will say Bachstein. So that H after the S is within parentheses, which means it's optional. It can be there, but it doesn't have to be there. And so that would be an example of an alternate pronunciation. The word below that is a challenging word. Anybody want to take a gander? Yes? Good. Weisnichtwo. So it's not pronounced Weisnichtwo, even though it might look like a Weisnichtwo. It's actually pronounced Weisnichtwo. So in German, the W spelling has the V sound. Instead of the V making the V sound, the W makes the V sound. So you have Weisnichtwo, where the two W's make V sounds. Isn't that pretty cool? Yeah? So I think that's where we can take a break.
Let's do some, just this, yeah.
After
this,
right?
So we'll take a quick break after this.
Some more practice. The first French word. And it means a landslide. Anybody want to try? No? Yes? Close. Ablement. Right? Just a teeny bit more nasalized N. But that was really good. Ablement. Right? And then the word after that, it's also French. Yes? I'm sorry? Maquillage. So maquillage is French for makeup. You have the M-A, that's ma, K-E with the line on top of it, maquille, and then the optional Y, the A with the two dots, A, Z-H, age, maquillage. So it's not maquillage, it's maquillage. And if you know that this word is from French, and you hear the word maquillage, that'll help you remember that in French, when you have the iya sound, you may have a LL. Just like in Spanish, you have words like pollo, which is Spanish, but here you have the two L's in French, and they make the maquillage. Portuguese. Portuguese has interesting pronunciation patterns. Anybody want to try the thick black bean stew? Yes? Yep, good job. Feijoada. So instead of being feijoada, it's feijoada. So the EI makes the A sound, the J makes a J sound, and then the D is kind of like a soft D, where instead of ada, you have ada. And then the Russian word, it means a blindly devoted member of a political party. Yes, go ahead. Apparatchik. Apparatchik. Good job. So this word, Russian uses spellings like the K at the ends of words, and you have a word that's apparatchik, and it means a blindly devoted member of a political party. Okay? Good. So let's take a quick break. And so
come back, we'll do. When we come back.
When we come back, we'll continue with the spelling rules and how you can help yourself spell simple spelling patterns that are kind of tricky. Since the suffix ing starts with an I, you should take out the silent E. So now you have hoping, H-O-P-I-N-G, instead of P-E-I-N-G, hoping. Alleging follows the same rule. You take out the E in allege before you add the ing. Closable. Closable has close plus able. So you take out the E at the end of close before you make closable. Driving, you take out the E. Believable, you take out the E. Declarable, you take out the E. There are a few exceptions though. So not every word will follow this rule, and so the words that don't will be if the first word ends in a soft CE or soft GE sound. So a soft CE sound or a GE sound is something that makes the S or J sound instead of the K or G sound. Or if the suffix begins with A or O, which isn't always, like for example, closable or believable or declarable. But in words like knowledgeable, right? Knowledgeable has a soft G sound. So the knowledge. When you add able to that, you keep the able after the E. Outrageous, you keep the E because if you didn't have the E, it would be outrageous, wouldn't it? Right? And outrageous isn't exactly outrageous.
You have everything here, so
Right.
you can just...
In the handout, you can follow along if you want to because the rules are listed here as well. The word enforce, enforceable, has to have the E because it's a soft C, and if you took out the E, it wouldn't be soft anymore. It would become enforkable. And sticking something with a fork isn't exactly the same as, say, enforcing a law. Police shouldn't really stick forks in people. But noticeable also has to have the E instead of being noticable. So in the worksheet, which is the other packet besides the handout and the survey, there are a few questions for you guys to do. So these are the questions in the these are the ones in the worksheet.
No, this one you have to mention over there, but I have this in other place also, but the questions are from 1 to 7.
Have you guys found your worksheet? So in questions 1 to 7, you have the dropping the silent E exercise. Meant, yes. Argument, right. Yes, you do. So, for example,
because that has
right. And that happens to be the next right here.
My
So-
question on the one before on the
Yes?
was, doesn't allege and knowledge have the same J sound?
Right. And so those would be exceptions to the exception. Which happens to be one of the reasons that they're in the examples.
Okay.
So, right. And that's one thing about rules. That's one of the reasons we have spelling bees, is because not all the words follow any rules. And so these rules that we're coming up with are more of patterns. And so stuff like that happens where we come up with a rule that applies to words like hoping, and we see alleging follows that, but knowledge doesn't. And so, generally speaking, the soft G sound would need to retain the E to make the same soft G sound instead of being knowledgeable. Except alleging happens to be one of those words that the English speakers have decided will be pronounced alleging and not allegging, even though the spelling is that of allegging. Right. Yes, go ahead.
The difference between those two words specifically, your suffix in alleging starts with an I, not an A or an O. The suffix is starting with an I, not an A or an O.
So
it's not the same combination. It's only whenever you're combining with an A or an O in the soft G, E, or CE sound. That's when you
great observation. Thank you very much. So the suffix beginning with an A or an O would also supplement that in that alleging, where you have the gerund suffix, follows the rule of taking the E out, whereas knowledgeable, where you have an A or an O, requires the E. Okay.
Next slide.
So here we can continue. For example, words like handleable, whistleable, because they have the A and the O, the E will stay there. Or if the suffix begins with a consonant, all the previous rules had to do with vowels. If it starts with a consonant, then we will keep the E. So words like careless. Not having care is substantially different from not having a car. Right? Right? So careless has an E, whereas carless has no E, because the word car itself doesn't have any E at the end. Statement has an E. Arrangement, you keep the E. Trueness, you keep the E. There is an exception, though, for a word like argument, where you do have to, you drop the E. The E isn't necessary for the pronunciation, and so that's one of the words where the spelling is just so in the English language. Not all of these words are going to have a set reasoning behind why they are so. In something like this, it's easy to see that carless and careless have a difference. And something like that isn't necessarily present in argument, where argument and argument, so we just spell it with an ARGU.
We ask these words a lot.
Right. These words are pretty important to know, especially unappeasable. I missed this in 4th grade in the spelling bee, and so did Aditya Chamarupati, who was the previous winner of the Houston PBS
2009.
in 2009. He also missed the same word in his 4th grade B. This seems to be a word that spellers misspell on a regular basis, or at least in my experience.
Or they ask a lot.
Right, and they do ask it a lot. I've seen it asked in 3-4 different Bs. If you had a question? No? Okay.
Okay. Shall we do the one?
Right.
Drop the E. No matter.
Right. Here. Yes. Yes? That depends on the word. Do you have any examples? Mm-hmm. Right. So the word agreeable keeps both E's, because not only do you have the able starting with an A, you also have to keep both of the E's for the. You also have to keep both of the E's for agree. So agreeable would have both of the E's, whereas, for example, a completely unrelated word, which is Spanish, agregación. Oh, this one. Not this one. Why is it not going down? Here it is. French. Different word. Diplomatic procedure. This is unrelated. It just popped into my head, but it's an interesting word. Okay.
So they keep the one E
Right.
and the...
So here, even though it comes from agree, there is only one E in the spelling because it's French. And so the way in which it was formed is different. Does that make sense?
We do question 1
Right.
through 10.
So questions 1 through 7 and 10 in the worksheet. Have any of you tried any of those questions?
Let's do together.
Yes? Good? Okay. So let's go through those together. Question number 1. Danceable. Does anyone know how it can be spelled? Yes? Yes, good. So E-A-B-L-E. So you're adding the A-B-L-E, and so you'll keep the E in dance. Otherwise it would become dankable, right? Number 2, serviceable. Yes? Right. serviceable or serviceable? Would you like to see it? Serviceable. Would you like to see it? And so, after that is advantageous. Does anyone know how you spell advantageous? Yes, go ahead. Good job.
Good job. Great job.
Yeah. Advantageous.
And which grade are you in, Kavya? Which grade are you going to? You are going to first grade? Awesome! Sticker.
Yes. And so in the word like advantageous, you need to have the E, because the suffix begins with O, and the prefix ends in an E. So to retain the pronunciation of the soft G, you have to keep the E. For unpronounceable, yes? Good job.
Very good.
unpronounceable.
And you're going into third grade. All right.
Good job. Have a sticker. Great job. So, a word like unpronounceable, right? So it comes from pronounce, and then able, which denotes ability, so you can do something, and then un, which means it negates. So unpronounceable is the opposite of pronounceable, right? Yeah? So if something is unpronounceable, you cannot pronounce it. And because of that, it's not pronoun cable, it's pronounceable, which is why you have to have the E for the soft C sound. Agreeable? Yes? Yes. Good job.
We have a room full of champions.
We do. And so, agreeable has 2 E's and then an ABLE, and you have to keep both of the E's. Foreseeable, number 6. Almost. Foreseeable actually has FORESEEABLE, since you have to have the word foresee. You know the word before, right? The before is related to the word foreseeable. Because to foresee something means to predict it, to see it before it happens. And that's why you have the FORE, like in before, in foreseeable. But you got the SEEABLE right. Good job. That's another tricky part in the word. What about 7? Marriageable? Yes?
M-A-R-R-I-G-A-B-L-E.
Almost. Marriageable is actually M-A-R-R-I-A-G-E-A-B-L-E. So it's like the spelling of marriage with able at the end.
But marriage is a difficult spelling.
Right, marriage is a very difficult spelling.
It is, yeah. No wonder.
What about achievement? Achievement is pretty tricky word.
A-C-H-I-E-V-E-M-E-N-T.
Great job. A-C-H-I-E-V-E-M-E-N-T. So you have to achieve something, and then having achieved something is an achievement. Would you like a sticker?
You dropped the E on that one?
Yes. So in the spelling of achievement, you have A-C-H-I-E-V-E-M-E-N-T. You do not drop the E in achievement. No. Because the suffix begins with the consonant, which is why you have to keep the E. So the second rule is doubling the final consonant. When do you have to double the final letter in a word when you're adding something to the end of the word? So let's say you have the word stop, right? So stopping has two P's, even though stop has only one P at the end, right? So instead of having stoping, you have to have stopping. Instead of robing, you have to have robbing, because robing has to do with clothes, robes, whereas robbing has to do with the process of robbing someone. So if you have a consonant plus a vowel plus a consonant, so like the word stop has T and then O and then P, or rob has R and then O and then B, right? So if you have a word that's like that, you'll need to double the final consonant when you make the word with a suffix attached. Or if you have a word with more than one syllable, where the stress is actually not on the syllables in the beginning, but rather on the syllable at the end, you double the last letter. So a word like repel, where it's not rappel, it's repel, which is why repelled, having done repelling, has two P's and then two L's at the end of the word repel. Begin has two N's in beginning. When you don't do this is when the final syllable does not have a stress. So a word like listen, right? You put more stress on the li than the sen. It's not listen, it's listen. Which is why when you have listening or glistening, you only have S-T-E-N-I-N-G, not two N's. Or like happening. Happening or happened, they only have one N. If the word ends in two consonants, so it's not a consonant, a vowel, and another consonant, if it's only two consonants at the end of the word, then you don't need to double the final consonant. So start or burn, having started or having burned, only requires one of the T and the N at the end. So you can answer questions 11 and 12 on your worksheet. Okay. So, has anyone answered question 11? Yes, go ahead. Yep, good job.
Say it loudly, sir.
So, preferred is spelled P-R-E-F-E-R-R-E-D. Okay. What about question 12? Committing? Yes?
C-O-M-M-I-T-T-I-N-G.
That is correct. Committing is spelled C-O-M-M-I-T-T-I-N-G.
Everything is useful.
Right. Sukarabo.
No, that's fine. Then we go
Another exception to this rule is if two vowels come directly before the last consonant. So these are all exceptions to the consonant vowel consonant rule. If you have a word like remain, where you have two vowels, A-I, and then an N, then you don't need to double the N in the word remaining. But if the word ends in the consonant, sometimes vowels W and Y, like play or snow, then you don't need to double that in playing or snowed. Okay. Yes?
13 and 14.
Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions regarding that?
Question
No?
13 and 14.
So you can do questions 13 and 14 on the paper.
Don't wait.
Okay, so who has number 13? Yes?
C-O-N-E-L-A-I-N-I-N.
Yes, that is correct.
I told you.
Absolutely.
Oh, you do not double the final.
Right. So complaining is spelled C-O-M-P-L-A-I-N-I-N-G. What about alerted? How do you spell alerted? Yes?
A-L-E-R-T-E-D.
Right. Alerted is spelled A-L-E-R-T-E-D. Okay? So rule number 3 is fairly simple. Whenever you add a prefix to the beginning of a word, the spelling of the word remains unchanged. So a word like misshapen, where you have the prefix miss and then the word shapen. So you have miss plus shapen, and both of them have S's, so it's M-I-S-S-H-A-P-E-N. Immutable, I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E. Irrational, I-R-R-A-T-I-O-N-A-L. Immature, I-M-M-A-T-U-R-E. Irresponsible, I-R-R-E-S-P-O-N-S-I-B-L-E. So you can do questions 15 and 16. Does anyone know what question 15 is? Yes? Good job. Misspell
Who was that?
is orange. M-I-S-S-P-E-L-L for misspell. Ama.
Yeah.
Orange shirt.
Yeah, I saw that.
Great. So the word yes? Yes, absolutely.
I-M-M-A-V-I-G-A-B-L.
Good job. Okay. So rule number 4 is the infamous I before E rule. So there are a few words that follow this rule and many that do not, but the words that do we generally can classify. So I before E is except after C. So if it's the long E sound, words like peace or niece or yield or brief, chief, they all have IE. After a C, it is not IE, it is EI. So words like ceiling or receive or perceive all have CEI. If it's a long A sound, like way or nay, vain, faint, you won't have the IE, you'll have the EI. This also applies for the short E sound, the schwa, like foreign. Foreign has EI, not IE. If the two vowels are pronounced separately, words like science or deity, it should be spelled as it's pronounced. Because science, for example, has the I sound and then a schwa. You have I, science, which is why you have I and then an E. Because the E can't exactly make the I sound, unless you have EI to make the I sound, and then you have no letters left for the schwa. Concierge has the IE for cierge. Fiery has F-I-E-R-Y. Fiery isn't spelled like the word fire. So F-I-R-E turns into F-I-E-R-Y. Does that make sense? Yeah? So there are some exceptions to this rule. Words like friend, it has a eh, and it's spelled with an I-E. Caffeine, C-A-F-F-E-I-N-E, not I-E. Kaleidoscope kind of applies to the separate vowels rule, where you have E-I. Seize, the long E sound. Sufficient and patient, or you can press here and push up. So now you can do questions 17 through 20. Does anybody have question 17? Go ahead.
Receipt. R-E-C-E-I-P-T.
Receipt. R-E-C-E-I-P-T. That's correct. So what about fiercely or believe? Yes? Can you spell the word? F-I-E-R-C-E-L-Y, yes, and then believe. That's correct. Good job. So fiercely and believe both have I-E. What about beige, like the color? Yes? Right. Beige is spelled B-E-I-G-E. Reindeer. Yes. Good. Reindeer is spelled R-E-I-N-D-E-E-R.
Why did you come to kid? Like to Michael?
So now is rule number 5. If a word ends in seed, right? Choosing between S-E-D-E, C-E-E-D, and C-E-D-E. You guys have seen the word succeed, right? Yeah? S-U-C-C-E-E-D. And then exceed, like you exceeded expectations. E-X-C-E-E-D. And then proceed, like proceed with what you are doing, which is studying spelling. So these 3 words are the only 3 words in the dictionary that end in C-E-E-D, which is quite helpful because now you don't have to worry about one entire pronunciation of seed.
Wow.
That's quite helpful, isn't
That
it?
is a very, very
Yeah.
great thing.
So now, S-E-D-E. There are only 2 words in the dictionary that end in S-E-D-E. And one of them, kind of, you don't have to worry about because there's a variant of supersede. It can be spelled either way and it will be counted as correct. So basically just obsede. I'm sorry?
What does it mean? Obscene.
Obsede. Obsede means to obsess.
Go figure.
And that's, yes, it is. It comes from Latin obsidere, to sit at, possess. that would be related to the word sedentary. Sedentary, like sitting, stationary.
Staying in one place.
See, Latin sedere, to sit. So, obsessing, sitting in one place and obsessing over something. So the word obsede would be related to the word sedentary, even though they might not seem related at all. So now you've eliminated 2 out of the 3 spellings of seed, and all the remaining words are spelled C-E-D-E. So words like secede, the secession of Texas land, the to recede, the floodwaters have receded. We went through that a few weeks ago. Intercede, precede, to come before something, concede. All of these words all end in C-E-D-E. Okay? S-E-C-E-D-E? Yes. What's it? So it kind of find it. Oh, okay. Right. Now.
Now, this is a big one.
Right. No. This next rule is a big one because personally, I thought this was one of the most challenging ones.
Try putting.
So. The ABLE and IBLE words, I would have to sit down and make giant lists of them because I thought they were challenging. Does it end in ABLE or IBLE? The somethingable words. Yes?
A-B-L-E.
That is correct. That is a word. And IBLE isn't a word. And that is completely related because there are 5 times as many ABLE words as IBLE words in the dictionary. So thank you very much. Because ABLE, there are 5 times as many words, which means there's that much more of a probability that you'll get it right if it's ABLE. But then again, it is the spelling bee, and they will choose words that will knock you out. And so it's good to know which words you're spelling. If you're left with a complete word when you take out the ABLE part, or the IBLE part, or whichever you're thinking, and you're left with a word that stands on its own, then it's most probably an ABLE word. So something like reasonable, that's a reasonable idea, or a reasonable approximation. If you take out ABLE, you're left with reason. And reason on its own is a word. Accountable minus able is account, and that's a word, so it's ABLE. There are a few exceptions to this, such as combustible, where you take out the IBLE and you have the word combust, or suggestible, where you take out the IBLE and you have the word suggest. But if you try to add ate, ate, to the non-suffix part of the word, if this forms a word, you can spell it with ABLE. And this applies to the words that don't fall under the previous rule. So let's say you have the word accumulable, right? If you take out the ABLE, you're not left with a complete word since you have accumul, but you can add ATE and get accumulate. Separable, if you take out the ABLE, it makes separ, which isn't a full word, but you can add ATE and get separate, which is a verb and a valid word. Perspirable, able to be sweated, or able to sweat. You take out the ABLE and you're left with perspir, which isn't a word, but perspirate is a word. And perspiration is also a word, sorry. And then, words that are not formed directly from an unchanged English words are more likely to end in Ible. So words like audible, where you take out the Ible, you're not left with a complete word, and you can't have a word audate. Oops. That's most probable to to have IBLE as a suffix. So feasible, probable to occur, possible. Words like probable and possible. See, probable comes from the word probability. And possible is an IBLE word. Permissible, to permit. So ISSIBLE. If you try to add shun to the suffix, to the non-suffix part of the word, and if that is a valid word, then you know it can be spelled with IBLE, with a few exceptions. But words like corruption, so you take out the corruptible, the Ible from corruptible, and you get corruption when you add a shun. A word like omissible, where you take out Ible, add a shun, and you get omission from the omit. Words like permissible, where you had an Ible, you take out the Ible and add shun, you get permission. Because words that, for example, end in the T, like permit and omit, have shun forms, where the shun suffix in itself is like the action or one particular instance of an object, which is why that rule kind of works out. Words like erodible and erosion. Words that end in NS usually have Ible as a suffix. So, comprehensible. You can comprehend something, and comprehension, comprehensible. COMPREHENSIBLE. There are a few exceptions. Words like cleansable, able to be cleansed. CLEANSABLE, not IBLE. Dispensable, also ABLE, not IBLE. So can any of you summarize the different rules in the ABLE, IBLE section here? Possibly. Just try it. You can give me one. Yes, go ahead.
If you can take away the able from it,
Mm-hmm.
and it equals a word, and it has a word, then it should be able. It should be the suffix.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anything else? Yes, go ahead.
If you can add ATE to a word, then you can add ATE.
Right. Yes. Oh, okay. Anybody else? Anything that was on? Yes. Shun. Right. Shun and IBLE go together. So here. Anything else? No? Right. Now comes the part where EABLE comes into play. That's another fun part, and possibly another reason why there are many more ABLE words than IBLE. So words that end in a single consonant and E, you drop the final E and spell it with ABLE. This ties into the first rule that we did before. So words like write and writable, you can take out the E. Love and lovable, you can take out the E. Compare and comparable, you take out the E. But when you have the soft CE and GE, those are many of the words where you have EABLE. So words like peace and peaceable, or change and knowledge like we've covered before, with the exceptions of words like forcible and submergible. So, I'm sorry? Yes. And you should especially create a contrast between enforceable and forcible. Because you have enforce and force. Enforceable has a CEABLE, but forcible has CIBLE. And that's just one of the examples of when the English language has gotten kind of confused and left a spelling that is seemingly random, but that we go by. Okay. With a hard CE or GE sound, ABLE is good enough. practicable, despicable, or practicable, despicable, navigable, litigable, litigation, navigation, despising. All these words have able. But if you have an incomplete word, and a soft G sound, it is usually Ible. Negligible, eligible, and there's a typo here. Oops, discard. Eligible, negligible, tangible, intelligible, they all have Ible. Does everyone understand? So if you have a hard CE or hard GE sound, how do you spell a word with Ible? Anyone? Someone from the back? Yes? No? Yes? So if you have a hard CE sound, like despicable, you'll spell it with an ABLE. If you have a soft G sound, it'll be IBLE, like tangible, but be careful for words like submergible. Thank you. Words that end in CE but are complete words, like deducible, where you take out Ible and you get deduce, and you can add the shun like before. So deduction, deduce, and IBLE. Reduce, introduce, reduction, introduction. All of those feed into IBLE words. Okay? So now, in the worksheet, we can do the Rule 6 questions 21 through 34. The ABLE, IBLE, EABLE words. Everybody find those? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So, the first word, adjustable. Does anyone have an idea of how you can spell adjustable? Yes?
It's number 21.
21. So how do you spell adjustable? Right. ADJUSTABLE.
Good job.
Admirable? Yes? No? Okay. Yeah. Close. This is actually an ABLE word. So to admire, to admirable. ADMIRABLE. Irritable, 23. Yes, go ahead. Good job. Irritable is spelled IRRITABLE. Irritable. Transmissible? Yes? Good job. TRANSMISSIBLE for transmissible. IBLE for transmissible. You take out the Ible and you're left with a word that can turn into transmission. Okay? What about incorrigible? Yes? Good job. Incorrigible is spelled INCORRIGIBLE. Incorrigible. Ostensible? Anyone? Yes? Good job. OSTENSIBLE. for ostensible. What about responsible?
R-E-S-P-O-N-S-A-B-L-E.
Almost. O-S-T-E-N-S-I-B-L-E for ostensible. Responsible?
R-E-S-P-O-N-S-E-A-B-L-E.
Not exactly. Responsible is actually I-B-L-E. R-E-S-P-O-N-S-I-B-L-E. And for example, you have the word responsibility, right? That's where you have I-B-I-L-I-T-Y. So some of these words are common words that might not make sense, but it's good to know, such as the words responsible. What about offensible? Akil?
O-F-F-E-N-S-I-B-L-E.
Good. O-F-F-E-N-S-I-B-L-E. Agreeable? Yes, go ahead.
A-G-R-E-E-A-B-L-E.
Good job. Agreeable is spelled A-G-R-E-E-A-B-L-E. Fleeceable? Number 30. Someone near the back want to try? Yes?
F-L-E-E-C-E-A-B-L-E.
That is correct. What about carriageable? Yes.
C-A-R-R-I-A-G-E-A-B-L-E.
Yes. Carriageable is spelled C-A-R-R-I-A-G-E-A-B-L-E. Right. It's like marriageable. M-A-R-R-I-A-G-E-A-B-L-E. Fatigable? Yes?
F-A-T-I-G-E-A-B-L-E.
Close. So this word actually has two ways it can be spelled. Either F-A-T-I-G-A-B-L-E or F-A-T-I-G-U-A-B-L-E. You see? So here, it can be spelled either fatigable or fatigable. This means easily tired or susceptible to fatigue. What you should know, however, is that A, the pronunciation is different. So this is pronounced fatigable or fatigable. This one, see, this has the schwa right here. Here you have the schwa, so fatigable. Here you have the emacron, fatigable. Does that make sense?
So if you spelled it either way, it would be correct? With the
Depending
same
on the
definition?
pronunciation. With the same definition, yes. Generally, you should be correct because A, they would tend to avoid words like this. But if they did, they would give you the pronunciation fatigable because that applies to both of the spellings. If you were given the pronunciation fatigable, that only applies to the one with the G-A-B-L-E, not G-U-A-B-L-E. Does that make any sense? Slightly? It gets kind of confusing when you have multiple spellings for the same word and multiple pronunciations. So, like, for example, the National Spelling Bee tends to avoid controversial words like this, but they often accept both spellings, yes. What is more important, though, more important, I think, is the word indefatigable. Oh my gosh. Indefatigable. Indefatigable only has one spelling. And it's incapable of being fatigued, untiring, unwearying, and it's only I-N-D-E-F-A-T-I-G-A-B-L-E. So indefatigable only has F-A-T-I-G-A-B-L-E, which is pretty important to remember. Everyone got that? Yeah? So What about induce, induction, and inducible? Anybody know how you spell that? Number 33. Yes, go ahead. Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah,
He got the right
that's good.
sound. He did the I.
inducible.
Good job, Akhil.
So, in the word inducible, you take out the Ible and you get induce, which you can add a shun to and get induction, which is why it has an Ible. So, number 34, anyone else want to try? Produce, production, producible. Yeah. Yes? That is correct. Producible is spelled Producible. That's good. So now we can go to, does the word end in US or OUS? And this is one of the times where the questions that you can ask. Anybody remember the question that pertains to this?
Good job.
That is correct. The part of speech directly pertains to this. Adjectives end in OUS, having a certain characteristic. Carnivorous, eating flesh. Perilous, having perils, full of hazards. Perilous, OUS. Nouns end in US. Words like radius or circus or virus all end in US because they're nouns. So this is the direct differentiation between US and OUS. You have US, which is a noun suffix, and OUS, which is an adjective suffix. And that is what clarifies that. Important words to know, however. Something like this. When you have a word like sarcophagus and sarcophagus, it's important to know what each means. Does anyone know the difference between the top and the bottom? Yes?
On the bottom one, there's a Julius. And on the top one, there's a G-O-U-S.
You're correct. And the bottom one is a noun. It's a stone coffin. So, this is from Greek. It comes from the Greek roots sarko, meaning flesh, phage, meaning eating, and then us, the noun suffix. So they're likening a coffin to something that eats flesh. The box that eats up bodies. However, the word sarcophagus at the top, this comes from sarco, flesh, phage, eating, and then the OUS adjective suffix, which indicates actually eating flesh. So, sarcophagus would be eating flesh. Animals who eat flesh would be sarcophagus, or carnivorous, because carnivorous would be the Latin counterpart to the Greek sarcophagus. Does that make sense? Carne in Latin means meat, and that is how you have Spanish words like carne, like for example, carne asada. And then vor means eating. A voracious reader is someone who devours books. All of those come from vor, meaning eating. And then the adjective suffix us. Okay? You want to go there? All right. Now, shus, shus, and shus. Adjective suffix. So, before we embark on this journey, does anyone want to answer 35 and 36? Yes, go ahead, Akhil. That is correct. Great job. So acidulous is spelled A-C-I-D-U-L-O-U-S. Acidulous.
Because,
I'm sorry?
because
Because it is an adjective. Does that make sense? So you have O-U-S. And 36, I see a raised hand there. No? Oh. Just go ahead. Almost. So I like this word because it has a really cool definition. Does anyone know what a parameter is? Probably not. Yes. So a paranderus is a mythical stag able to change colors like a chameleon. And because it's a stag, it's a noun. It doesn't have relating to a stag. That would be O-U-S, but because this is talking about the stag itself, it is P-A-R-A-N-D-R-U-S. Good job. And so now we can go on to the shus, shus, and shus. So what words end in C-E-O-U-S, what words end in C-I-O-U-S, and what words end in T-I-O-U-S? So words that have to do with some scientific words or the composition of a material often have the spelling C-E-O-U-S. So like the word herbaceous, having the characteristics of an herb. Arenaceous. Does anyone know what the root aren means? This? Sand. So arena comes from that. Arenicolous are animals who live in sandy places, which is important because the root colus, O-L-O-U-S, means inhabiting. This here. No. The C-O-L-U-S root means inhabiting, with the O-U-S adjective suffix. But if you have a word that is an adjective relating to human feelings, qualities, or actions, this generally ends in I-O-U-S, C-I-O-U-S, or T-I-O-U-S. So words like malicious and gracious, so marked by kindness or given to desire to harm, have C-I-O-U-S. Ambitious means having a desire to succeed. Ostentatious means attracting attention by gaudiness. How fancy can you be? Is ostentation. Okay. Another word directly related to ostentatious is pretentious. Pretentious is gaudy, showy, and ostentatious can be pretentious. Ostentation can be pretentious. There are a few exceptions. Words like courteous or spontaneous have E-O-U-S. No C there, you might notice. And so these words just end in E-O-U-S, and they're just words that you should know. If the noun form of the word ends in C-I-O-N, then the adjective is spelled C-I-O-U-S. That's a linkage correlation. Suspicion and suspicious, and that also applies for T. Caution and cautious. Infection and infectious. If the noun ends in CE, the adjective ends in C-I-O-U-S. So you have words like fierce and ferocious, or space and spacious. So try doing questions 37 through 41. So does anyone know 37, bulbaceous? Yes? Good. Bulbaceous is spelled B-U-L-B-A-C-E-O-U-S. What about voracious? Yes?
V-O-R-A-C-I.
Right. Voracious is spelled V-O-R-A-C-I-O-U-S. And the reason is because this describes a characteristics relating to a human quality. Someone can have a voracious appetite. Like I said, they can be a voracious reader. And so, which is why it's C-I-O-U-S. What about coriaceous?
No, I think
Yes?
C-O-R-I-A-T-I-O-U-S.
Not exactly. Coriaceous, because it has to do with a scientific term, is actually C-E-O-U-S. Good try though. So coriaceous means like leather in appearance or quality, tough, right? Which is why it's the material composition, it's tough, and it's like leather, which is why it has a spelling C-E-O-U-S. Deceptious? Good. Deceptious has the spelling D-E-C-E-P-T-I-O-U-S. And it's related to deception. And it's a human characteristic. So what about repetitious? Right. Repetitious is a good spelling word. It can have a tricky spelling. Anybody want to try? Yes, go ahead.
R-E-P-I-T-I-C-I-O-U-S.
Close. It's actually R-E-P-E and then T-I-T-I-O-U-S. So repetitious comes from the word repeat, but the A doesn't stay. And so it's R-E-P-E-T-I-T-I-O-U-S. Okay? This is repetitious. It's repeating. And the spelling kind of repeats itself too. And the word repeat went into the word repetitious. But here you have P-E-T. And then T-I-O-U-S also.
So in this,
Yes.
repeat, like repetition, but actually repeatable.
Right, right. So a word like repeatable has repeat plus able, whereas a word like repetition has R-E-P-E-T-I-T-I-O-N, which is an interesting observation. Thank you. That's good. Now, full or full. How many L's do you put at the end of full? So a word like playful or beautiful. Yes? 2 L's? Sometimes, not always. Yes? That's the other option. And so that, in many cases, is the answer. So words like beautiful, right? It comes from beauty plus full. So a word like beautiful comes from being full of beauty. And there's another word that's a grammatical term for this juxtaposition when it forms a word. But this comes here, and it makes B-E-A-U-T-I, this is important, F-U-L. you do not have F-U-L-L here. As well as words like playful, full of play. So you replace beauty with play. Then you have P-L-A-Y-F-U-L, not F-U-L-L. So words like restfully, when you have the li at the end of the full, that's when you add the L back. So help, full of help is helpful with one L, but then helpfully has two L's again. If you had only one L there, then you would probably pronounce it helpfully, which isn't the pronunciation of helpfully. So before that, you can answer 42 through 44. Does anyone know those? What is the spelling of peacefully? Yes?
Peacefully. P-E-A-C-E-F-U-L-L-Y.
Right. What about successful? Yes? Right. And skillfully? Good job. So skillfully is S-K-I-L-L-F-U-L-L-Y. And now we can move on to, does it end in a C or a CK, which is the last rule here. Oop. So a word that ends in a hard C adds a K before adding a suffix that starts with a vowel. So words like picnic, right? Picnic, and then picnicker, which is someone going on a picnic, and picnicking, which means having a picnic, all have C-K-E-R. Frolic. Frolicking. They are frolicking. They were frolicking. They have frolicked. They all have C-K-E-D. But the one interesting part is when the suffix does not start with a vowel, and you have the word frolically. Yes, it is. Frolically is the adverb. Well, I looked up adverb, which doesn't seem to be particularly helpful. It's not wicked. So the word frolically is the adverb for the adjective frolic.
So they were frolicking, thinking?
Right. Yes. In which case you would have one without the K and one with the K. Okay. So now, does anyone want to try 45 and 46? 45 is a cool word. Yes, go ahead.
B-I-V-O-U-A-K-E.
C-K-E-D, but good. And 46?
The second one at 45?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Oh, sure.
B-I-V-O-U-A-C-K-I-N-G.
Sure. And anyone want to try 46? Hydraulic, hydraulicking. So hydraulic is H-Y-D-R-A-U-L-I-C. Hydraulicking and hydraulic both have C-K-E-D because those follow the rule. Okay? So now we are done with the spelling rules section.
Are there any exceptions to that? Or if it's a hard C in the middle of the word? Or
There are not too many options.
There aren't really very many words that are this form of word, where there's like a CK at the end and then a, say a gerund or a adjective. But a gerund is the ing suffix that indicates action. So like swim and then swimming, which again you double the consonant. But here, most of the words do follow the rule. So there aren't many exceptions. And for example, like frolically is one of the words where you have a consonant, and that's why it doesn't have an additional K. Okay. Does that help answer your question?
yeah, oh yeah.
Great.
Just wondering.
So here's some commonly misspelled words. Has anyone ever spelled these words? Or had to spell these words? Yeah? Yeah? So, cemetery. How do you spell cemetery? Yes, go ahead. Good job. Cemetery. So what about past time? Yes? Good. So let's take a look at these words. There's a difference between desiccant and vesicant. Have you ever opened something like a camera out of its box, or like electronics, and they have like this little packet that says silica gel, do not eat? So that stuff is desiccant. What it does is it dries. It pulls the moisture out of the air. There's this stuff you can put in your closets. I don't remember what it's called. But it pulls the moisture out of the air and into a little baggy or tub. That's a desiccant. A vesicant is not nearly as beneficial. A vesicant is a blistering agent, like chlorine gas used in the World Wars. So that stuff is not particularly good for your health. Not that the first one is very good for your health, but the most silica gel ingestion does for you is makes you dehydrated. Drying agent, that's what it does. Stationary and stationary. So the first stationary, where you have A, is standing still. Like sedentary. But stationary, standing still, has an A, whereas stationary, materials for writing, like pens and pencils, have an E. Okay? A bridle that you'd put on a horse is spelled B-R-I-D-L-E. Whereas the marriage ceremony, the bridal, is a B-R-I-D-A-L. Lightning. L-I-G-H-T, light. And then happening, N-I-N-G, is this stuff that happens in the sky when you have a thunderstorm. Lightning. Whereas L-I-G-H-T-E-N-I-N-G describes something becoming brighter or lighting up. Lightening. So now is the difference between millenary and molinary, and millenary and millennialism. So molina here, molinary, means relating to a mill, right? So this actually comes from, has anyone ever heard of the term semolina? Like in your flour, you'll see semolina flour. That is where this word comes from, because molina means grain or wheat, which is why molinary, M-O-L-I-N-A-R-Y, is related to the word semolina. And both of these have to do with a mill. What do you do in a mill? You grind wheat down into flour. And then millenary has to do with women's headwear, like hats or caps. Millenary over there has to do with 1,000 years, which is a millennium. A millennium, which is M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-U-M, is 1,000 years, but relating to the millennium, millenary has only one N. Millennialism has two N's again. Okay? So some of these are just interesting little tidbits of words that can be confused, but are actually pretty useful in the spelling bee world. They do ask these words quite a lot. Even the IBLE, ABLE words like collectible. When you have a collectible, say, coin, or a signed, like a signed baseball, that's a collectible item. For collectors, that's T-O-R-S. Although you may be a, right. So And then a pastime is P-A-S-T-I-M-E. Only one T and only one S. You are trying to pass time by doing your pastime. And you may have done a pastime in past times. You see, and you can make fun games out of these too. Okay. Actually take the words and break them up into parts. Has anyone seen this before? Anyone thought of it before? How you can take a word like international, right? And break it up into 3 parts. Inter, meaning between, nation, which is actually nation, and then ul, which is like an adjective. It's describing the beginning part. So you have a prefix. A prefix comes from pre, meaning before, and then the root, or the main part, combining form, and then the suffix, which is fixated to the the end of the word. So for example, this word has a combining form or word root, nation, right? So the word nation here can be taken and inserted into all of these words that have nation. And then, for example, the word friend. You have friendly, friendship, unfriendly, friendless, to befriend someone. The root in, which means in, or into, plus struct, which is build. That's where we get structure, which is something that has been built, is instruct, instruction, and instructor. So for example, an instructor, to instruct would be to teach. Instruction would be what is taught. Instructor would be someone who teaches. And then con, which is interesting because there's this phenomenon called assimilation. 3 spellings, 1 root. Con, com, and call. They all mean together. So here we have the word construct, and it means to build together. Constructive, building together. So let's take the word photosynthesis. So photo means light. That's where we get the word photon. It's a unit of light. Photography. It's graphy is writing down. Photography is writing down light. So syn means together. Sim and syn, S-Y-M and S-Y-N mean the same thing. And then thesis, which is putting. So this is taking light and putting it together, is photosynthesis, or creating something out of light. So you have a photograph, which is writing down light, a photocopy, which is a copy of light, photochromic. Does anyone have an idea of what chrome means here? Yes?
Color?
Good job.
That is right. Good job. So photochromic means turning color based on light. That's kind of like these transition lenses you have in your glasses. So when you go outside, they turn darker. Have you ever seen that? Photocatalysis. Does anyone have an idea of what the root lysis means? No? Lysis, L-Y-S-I-S, here means breakdown. So catalysis is the breakdown of a substance. Photocatalysis is breakdown of a substance assisted by light. So if you, for example, some certain chemicals, if you leave them out and expose them to, say, sunlight or UV light, they actually start breaking down. Does anyone know what photogenic means? Yes, possibly. It's you look good in pictures? Yeah? Yeah? So what about syndrome? Does anyone know what a syndrome is? Perhaps you know him as the superhero from The Incredibles. Or the supervillain, rather. Yes? Yeah, kind of, yeah. So syndrome is like a disease. You have a synagogue, which is a really interesting word because the agog is really interesting. But a synagogue is a place of worship. And effectively, the two roots in that word are sin, which is together, and agog, which in this sense is basically crowd. So agog in this word means crowd. Does that make sense? When you take a crowd and put them together, that makes a word that means a place of worship where people come together in crowds. These words. Impeccable. So im means not. Pec, in Latin, peccare, means to sin. Has anyone heard the word peccavi? A peccavi means a minor offense. So here, peccable means liable to sin. Impeccant means free from error or fault. A peccavi is a confession of sin or error. Peccadillo is a slight offense or a petty fault. So you have not. So impossible, what does impossible mean? Not possible, right. So what does imperfect mean? Not perfect, right. So what does it mean when something is buildable? You can build it, that is correct. If something is readable, you can read it, good. So simple roots like that, and more complex roots like peccare, to sin, all come together to put these words together. So here's some good roots. Creed, to believe. Credentials are the evidence of someone's qualifications, right? Bene, benevolent, is someone who truly wants to do good for other people, right? Can anyone think of any other words that come from bene, meaning good or well? Yes? Benefit, good. Anyone else? There's surprisingly many. What about Spanish bueno? Bueno comes from Latin bene, meaning good. In French, it's bon. You have benediction, benefactor, benefice, beneficent, beneficiary, beneficial. All of these words come from bene. And like the words benefice, beneficiary, they come from the Latin root facere, which means to do. Dict means speak or word. So a dictionary is something that contains words. Has anyone heard the term diction before? Yeah? So diction is like your word choice, right? That's a language arts term. Audi is to hear. So audible means you can hear something. You know audio, right? Audio is like sound. What about crone? Crone is time. So a watch can be a chronometer. So like a stopwatch or a timer is a chronometer or a chronograph. An anachronism is something that's out of another time period. Or let's say something that's in the wrong time. Derm is skin. So does anyone know what the root itis means? Inflammation. So itis the root itis. The root itis means inflammation. So dermatitis is inflammation of the skin. Do you guys know what inflammation is? Yeah. It's when like something gets irritated, it can swell or it can get red. It's like and then so can anyone think of any other words that come from derma? Yes? Dermatologist. Right. So a dermatologist is someone who studies the skin, or a doctor who specializes in skin. Folium, leaf. So portfolio is something that contains pages or leaves of paper. Foliate means shaped like a leaf. Any other words that come from foli? Yes? Foliage, good. So foliage literally means leaves. And that's where that word comes from. Yes? Follis? F-O-L-I-S? I'm sorry? F-O-L-I-C-E? I don't believe so. I can check. No, there's no word F-O-L-I-C-E. Although there is the word follicle. Has anyone heard of a follicle? Yeah? Do you have any idea what a follicle is? No? So a follicle is part of your hair. It's the a follicle is the cavity in your hair. And so a folliculus is the same thing. And that's different from leaf because that has 2 L's. And this has 1 L. So what about the word astronaut? Yeah? Does anyone know the yes?
Star sailor.
Yep. Has anyone heard of in Greek mythology, Jason and the Argonauts? Yeah? So what were they looking for? It's quite a bit into Greek mythology, but so we have astronaut, right? So astro not. So you have astro and you have not, right? Let's take this word. So you have not and astro. But and any words that have not?
Nautical?
Nautical, yep. So you have the word nautical. And astronaut and the Argonauts, right? So the Argonauts were looking for gold, the golden fleece. And that's what Argo is. So you have cressi, which means government. You have democracy, which is government by the people. Aristocracy, government by the best, according to the word. Diameter. Diameter can be broken up into dia and meter. So meter is measure, literally. So when you're measuring through or across, that is the diameter. Biology. Logy is like science or learning, and then bio is life. Bibliophile. Biblio is book, and phile is someone that loves something or is attracted to something. Chlorophyll. Anyone know what chlorophyll is? Yes?
Something related to photosynthesis.
Yep. So chlorophyll is the green pigment in plants that allows photosynthesis to happen. And so chlor means green, phyll means leaf. And in Greek, that was green leaf was chlorophyll. Gynecology, acrophobia, the fear of heights. Manufacture, here again, manu means hand, so manual labor, as opposed to menial labor, in terms of spelling, right? You've heard of manual labor, yeah? Have you heard of menial labor? Yeah? So you have menial. This is. But facture here in manufacture comes again from facere, to do. Fluvicoline, colas, this, just like Aaron-Nicholas, we said, was living in sand, right? So fluvicoline means living in rivers, because fluvi is related to flowing. Rivers flow. Floriferous. So flori means flower. fair means bearing, and us is the adjective ending. Not us like the noun ending, but ous like the adjective ending. So it kind of right. So if you look at part B on your worksheet, you can fill in the prefixes and suffixes. So you can take a look at that and try to make those words out of the suffixes and combining forms.
So you can tell one so they know what to do.
So
and there can be more than one answer. They
yeah,
more than one.
and there could be more than one answers in theory. The first word, for example, is discoverable.
Or
Uncoverable too, yeah. And like the second word, unpredictable. So after that, unlikely, disagreeable, unpredictable. So there's unlikely, improperly, disagreeable, unsuccessful, illogical, pre-logical, uncomfortable, disorderly, unequally, unexpectedly, reconstruction, reaction, unreasonable, dishonorable, unlucky, untrusty, like untrustworthy, unusually, disconnection, and renewable. Okay? Yeah. So these are the words in the roots exercise. Okay. So for example here, you can manipulate roots in a number of ways. In some ways they have a structure, in some ways they don't. You can combine many things together as long as they sort of work together. So, say in Greek, the combining form is often O, whereas in Latin it's often I. So like here, pseudonym, right? Here, onym means name, and pseudo means false. Onym is where the word name derives from. So name and onym are related. But pseudo means false. Can anyone think of another word that has pseudo in it? Pseudopod? Yeah? So a pseudopod is a kind of cellular creature. Yeah? And again, there are some pesky prefixes that sound like each other. So the two antis, anti and anti. Has anyone seen words like this before? Like antebellum or antecede? Or anti, for example, anti-aircraft cannon, right? You've heard antivirus on your computer. So anti, A-N-T-E, means before. So bellum means war, right? And anti means before. To seed, like we said in that previous slide, antecede means to come before. Does anyone know what antibiotic means here? Right. So it's kind of killing cells because it's killing life. So that's the purpose of an antibiotic, is to kill bacteria. But antibiotics can't kill viruses. So here's some more roots. So the difference between the two antis was that ante is before, whereas anti is against. Okay? Everyone got that? Yeah? So look at part B.
Part C.
Part C, right. Part C, question 19. Does anyone know what letter belongs in anticoagulant? Yes? Good. So an anticoagulant is something that prevents coagulation of blood. So that means it's supposed to make your blood thin and runny instead of having it thick and stuck together. So anticoagulant would have an I because it goes against something. What about antimeridian, number 20? Yes? E, good. So antimeridian means occurring before new. Okay. And now we have the two disses, dys versus dis. Has anyone heard of dyslexia? So dyslexia is, so the root dys, dys, has multiple definitions with a negative connotation, so bad or impaired, whereas dis is the opposite of. So dis is directly referring to something as being the opposite, whereas dys is simply referring to the other part and saying it's not like the normal other part. So something like dysentery would be abnormal inside guts, intestines, right? And which is diarrhea. Whereas disqualify would be the opposite of qualify, to take someone out from like a race. Okay? So, for example, let's look at number 21. Dyspepsia. What letter do you think that would be? Yes? Y. Good. So dyspepsia is a condition of disturbed digestion. And so it would be a Y. Whereas number 22. Yes? Good. I. So a lack of order, the opposite of an array is a disarray. A lack of order or sequence. Does that make sense? Yeah? So what about the two sinos? CYNO versus SINO. CYNO means dog. How many of you like dogs? How many of you like cats? Yeah? They're cool. So CYNO, for example, CYNODONT, right? It means a canine tooth, or having teeth like a dog. So, any other words that the second part of that word is related to? Anything that this is related to? Right here? Right. The dentist, right? Dont and dent, orthodontist, right? So an orthodontist You guys know what the orthodontist is? Yeah? Someone who puts braces on your teeth? Yeah. So, what the orthodontist does, orthodontist. So who remembers what an ist is? What is this?
Person who does something.
Right. So this is a person who does something. What about dog? Teeth. And ortho means correct or straight. So an orthodontist is someone who makes your teeth straight or correct. Okay? Right. So orthography is correct or straight writing. And this is also kind of related to, has anyone heard of rectilinear propagation? Yes. Absolutely, especially if you work with snakes. Because rectilinear means straight line. Rect. Does anyone know how different kinds of snakes travel in different kinds of paths, right? Like some snakes have like curvy paths and some snakes have like sideways paths. So rectilinear, some snakes travel in a rectilinear way. R T C T I L I N E A R. So, does anyone know what linear means? What word do you see right here? Line, right? Line.
What happened?
And recti means straight. So, just a line wasn't good enough. They had to take the line and make sure it was really, really straight. And that's why they came up with the word rectilinear. Straight line. Okay? So what does rectilinear mean?
Straight line.
Right. Okay. So SINO, on the other hand, refers to Chinese. So Sino-Tibetan, for example, refers to China and Tibet. A sinogram is a Chinese character. So look at questions 24 and 25. What would a sinophilist be?
CYNO.
Right. Good. Because a dog fancier would have CYNO. What about sinology, the study of Chinese language? Yes? Great, good job. Okay. So that's where we're going to stop for today. Great job, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this.